The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending our Cherwell AP webinar, Advanced Practitioner. Today we're going to do a deep dive on API and integrations with Eric Kruger. My name is Steve Day with Stratacom. I'm an account manager at Stratacom, and doing the presentation is Eric Kruger, senior consultant and one of the principal partners and owners of Stratacom. For those of you who don't know, I'll tell you a little bit about who Stratacom is. We are an IT consulting firm focused on IT service management solutions since 1997. For the past 7 years or so, we've been a Cherwell partner focused on implementations, phase 2 projects. We do upgrades, health checks. We've also created some maps that you can download from our site or the Cherwell. I think the map exchange is up and running now. Our latest map, just so everyone knows, is a Cherwell mobile client, and we're looking for some beta sites. So anybody that wants to beta test with us on a mobile client solution, get in touch with me. Let me know. This presentation will be recorded, so after this session, we'll have it available on our site, but I'll also send it out to all the attendees and some other Cherwell users. So look for a email blast from us in the upcoming week or so. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
All right, thanks, Steve. Good afternoon. And if it's Thursday and you're in Tampa, good morning. Sorry I couldn't make it live, but this is the same presentation I was going to do, so we decided to play the recorded one for you. So hopefully it's a lot of good information. So we're going to dive into the REST API today. Here's the agenda. So really, like I kind of struggled to put this together because I didn't know what levels people would be at, if they wanted in or out. So I kind of did both. And really, this is like a one-day training session. It's what it really should be to get deep down into the weeds. So I'm just going to touch on how the REST API works coming in and how you can go out and pull in REST APIs. And also, I'm going to show some examples. So I have some examples set up in Cherwell. I've got some external stuff set up that I can show you that uses REST API. I've got some things that you can think about using. But I'll start with a little overview, some tools you need in your toolbox. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. It's just, what do I need to get started? Do I need Visual Studio? Do I need a text editor? What do I need to get started? So I'll go over some of the tools that I use every day. And I do a lot of the REST integrations for our company. I'm kind of the in-house expert. We have a bunch of other people that can do them, but I usually end up doing them because I've done so many, dozens and dozens, probably hundreds over my career of these integrations. Some common examples. So just some things to get you thinking about what can I use REST for, either coming in or going out. And then we're going to get into setting up the REST API in your environment. So I'll just quickly go over how to set that up to make sure that it's up and running and that you can actually use it. How to use the Swagger API testing tool. That's the built-in kind of testing tool that Cherwell provides for your system. So it's specific and connects right to your system. And then I'm going to go into some PowerShell code usage, and that's kind of my favorite tool to use because it is so darn easy and it is ubiquitous, meaning that like it's on every machine. It's on Windows 10, it's on all the servers, and it's pretty easy to kick out code with that. So a lot of the integrations I do are in PowerShell, but yeah, even more often I use PowerShell to kick out JSON code for other developers to use. So they can see and use it in other tools like Postman. It's really the easiest way to kick out JSON code for me anyway. And then we'll look at pulling some data out of external REST sources. And I really wanted to look at OData because I actually had a request for this presentation for OData, and I kind of got into it, but to be honest, I haven't worked for, I've written a ton of OData backends, but I've never consumed one, so I wasn't sure what all the things were, and I was just getting into it for this call, and I just ran out of time. So I will revisit OData at a later date, maybe do like a half hour or something on it. And then just some cool examples of REST API usage that you can think about doing. So what is REST? REST is it stands for representational state transfer. It's just a standards-based architecture, and it uses HTTP. So there isn't really a standard around REST like there is around SOAP. SOAP is more standards-based. REST is more it's not as standards-based. It's more the transport mechanism is standard, and that's about it. It's resource-based, not action-based. It uses the core HTTP method, so you're kind of stuck with HTTP, which is get, put, delete, and post. Those are kind of all you can do, but it simplifies things too, and it is stateless. So if you like our mobile client, it's stateless, which means that Cherwell doesn't know what's going on with your REST things until you tell it. So there's no back and forth with REST. There's no you tell Cherwell you want something and it gives it to you. It has no clue what you're doing with it until you tell it what you did with it, right? Until you send the update back. Simpler than SOAP. This is a little out of date because really nobody uses SOAP anymore, but it's very rare. SOAP is only XML. REST is really open, like OData technically falls into REST. There's lots of different things. Better support for browsers and clients because it supports JSON. It doesn't have to be JSON, but almost everything I've ever done with REST has been JSON. Better performance and scalability, and REST can be cached. So I'll show you a couple of things, like I'll pull out our mobile client and show you some of the performance things that REST is good at, like how fast it is at looking things up, even on keyboard clicks. And it can be cached, which is super cool. So like offline, so if you think about mobile and like offline, updating tickets offline or creating things offline, you can cache all that. So that's kind of built into those protocols. So you can do a lot of offline stuff with REST. Just because the entire container is the same offline or online. So, and because of the stateless nature of it, you can go offline and 2 days later connect and push your REST update, and the server doesn't care. JSON, I mentioned that a little before. So a lot of times your REST, like when you call something in REST, you'll get a return of a JSON object. So it's a minimal readable format for structuring data. It's primarily used to transmit data between the server and web application. It's powerful exchanging data without requiring any complicated parsing or translations, and it's just text. So basically, it's just formatted text. And it doesn't have like a schema like XML does. The schema is kind of built into the JSON call. So we'll show you some JSON too, so you can see what it looks like. But that's what, if you pull stuff into Cherwell, you'll kind of have to know how the JSON is formatted, because you will in Cherwell need to either A, parse through it, or B, know what the properties are in order to pull those in. So I have an example of that. Why use REST as a standard? It really, it is the standard now, so this is a little out of date, but REST is probably everything you're going to run into. If you can do some sort of connection to it, API-wise, it's going to have a REST API unless it's super old. Okay, so your development toolbox, what should you think about using? So for working with REST API calls, PowerShell is great. So if you have PowerShell loaded on your machine, if you have Windows 7, you might have to load PowerShell. Windows 10, I think it just comes with all the Windows 10. It'll be on every Windows 2016 server unless you've got some minimal build sitting out there. But and then Cherwell does have some great PowerShell sample code available, which makes it super easy to use. So like create incident, search for incident, create user, update user. They're doing some searches. There's PowerShell code available, and I have those URLs, and I'll show you where that is. Although I did find out that the new help does not have PowerShell. They ripped it all out of there. in the brand newest help, and they only have C#. So, but I have a URL that's on the internet. It's one of our boxes, but you can get to it and pull down the PowerShell code and run it. And it works pretty well. I think there's a couple things like that don't work quite right, but they're pretty easy to fix. Like you got to make sure you got the full name right and stuff for your contact. But so a good JSON editor, viewer editor. So a lot of times, especially if you're pulling things in, you're going to want to look at the JSON before you get it into Cherwell, because Cherwell doesn't really have a great way to view JSON. I'll show you some things, but if you want to look at the structure, and once I get into the Cherwell piece, you'll understand why. But I like Visual Studio Code for like looking at JSON, parsing JSON. I also put a link in here. You can just Google like online JSON viewer. There's a bunch of them. I like this one. It's fast and clean and doesn't store your anything in a cookie. So you always it's not in there when you come back, which is nice. But it essentially just takes a JSON text and turns it into like object-based. And I can show you that too. I've got some sample JSON I'll throw in there in a little bit. Postman, fairly simple but pretty good REST testing tool. That's kind of what everyone uses now. I used to be SoapUI for XML, but now Postman's super popular. If you talk to developers, most developers I work with from companies, they'll say, oh, I'm using Postman. Okay, well, do you want JSON then? So I'll send them the JSON. So that's pretty easy to use. SoapUI, I used that for a decade or longer doing XML integrations, and I kind of had converted to do JSON integrations with it, but Postman's better. So I kind of switched to Postman for that over SoapUI. So I've kind of abandoned SoapUI, but it is a great testing tool if you want to do a lot of automated testing. SoapUI is great for that. And then the sample code from Cherwell's API help site. So what I have here, kind of their newest sample code, does not have PowerShell code snippets, but does have C#. The other great thing about PowerShell, if you use C#, you kind of need the underlying library, because they do a lot of object calls in C# that rely on the underlying objects being in your .NET libraries, and you have to make those, right? There's like an Apache Maven thing. I kind of go through that too, but you don't need that with PowerShell. You don't need to do any of that stuff. So I like PowerShell over C# for that. Okay, so just some common examples where we get into this of REST usage into Cherwell. So creating incidents from like external monitoring tools. So if you've got like anything that monitors your network and you want to create an incident for it from that tool, that's super common. Updating and closing tickets from those tools. So you can have an event monitor that creates an incident in Cherwell, and then if the event self closes, they can close it also from the event monitor in Cherwell. Integrating with other ticketing systems like Jira or ServiceNow or some of the other ones that we've done, that just other ticketing systems. So like a ticket exchange, like if you're in Cherwell and you assign that ticket to a Jira group, maybe it's got Jira in the name, or we put a checkbox on the team in Cherwell that it's a Jira team. We can create a ticket in Jira, and then closing the ticket in Jira, we'll close it in Cherwell. So kind of that back and forth ticket exchange. Of course, you can exchange statuses and logs or activity logs and all sorts of things like that. Creating users and teams in Cherwell from external sources. This is like pretty super common now. I've been doing this a lot, and we've also built, so for all the customers we're implementing, we're doing like 6 implementations right now for brand new customers. And for most of them, we are implementing Active Directory integration to Cherwell via PowerShell scripts, because there are some holes in Cherwell's Active Directory integration, like if people change roles or groups, how do you manage that if they're not in a group anymore? So we've got some PowerShell, a PowerShell script that syncs Active Directory to Cherwell. So if you want to manage your users and teams in Active Directory, and a lot of companies now, especially regulated companies, are moving towards something like SailPoint, which is more access management. So if they're doing that, then SailPoint has a built-in Active Directory, so they can manage all their teams and roles in SailPoint via Active Directory, and then we can just sync that right up to Cherwell, and it works pretty well. The only downside is you have to run it in a batch. It's not live, but you can make it pretty live if you want. Yeah, and I was just working this morning with a consultant on how are we going to create users in Cherwell from a SQL view, right? So we talked about modifying that script or just importing them via like a linked object. So, but you could do it from REST. So some customers have either users or customers sitting outside of their Cherwell system they need to pull in, and REST is sometimes a great way to do it. Two external sources are where we're pushing data out or pulling it back in, kind of the same thing, ticket exchange. A big one is customer data, so we're pulling in customer data from UltiPro or ADP or something like that. We have a lot of customers that get their customer data from, like, not all their customers are in Active Directory, so we've got a third-party system that we're pulling customers from. Managing customer work groups from Active Directory, or some external source, pull in location data, maybe from like Tririca or something like that. That's got an API we can connect to and pull in their location data. So those are just some of the scenarios that you might run into where you want to use REST. Okay, so this is, now we're getting into setting up. So we're kind of opening the covers here. How do we set up REST? How do we set up the REST API in your environment? So on-premise and hosted, you need to generate a REST API key. So that's the number one thing you have to do. You have to have this API key for integration. I'll go over a little bit where that is. And if you're hosted, that's all you got to do. Everything else is set up. Every hosted customer, you already have a internet accessible site. They've got the web server set up. Everything's set up the way you need it to be. So if you're hosted, you need to generate your REST API key, and that's like when we bring on someone for mobile, a mobile client. That's really all we need is an API key from them. Although I usually get a login so I can do some testing. But if you're on premise, then you got to make sure that the Cherwell web components are installed. You should have a URL that looks like either HTTP or HTTPS, and then your web server name, and then the actual web app is called Cherwell API. And if you don't have that, you need to install it. It needs to get installed. The Cherwell REST API hits that web server. So the Cherwell server does not proxy or take REST API calls. The IIS does it. There's an IIS app that does it. So and if you have an external system that you need to connect to your Cherwell system, like let's say you've got some hosted SaaS monitoring in Firescope or something like that that's hosted, and you want to connect it to your Cherwell system, you will need like an internet accessible route. So like Cherwell.yourcompany.com, like I've got like Cherwellmobile.stratacompany.com routes to our Cherwell mobile server behind our firewall, and I just reverse proxy that through a router. But you could also set up a DMZ with the Cherwell web server in it with a public name, and then route port 1433 from the web server back to the database. All right, so I've got some screenshots in here. So I always hesitate, do I do this live or screenshots? And then I tend to go towards screenshots because people download these and kind of use them as a reference. So if you like live, that's great, but then to see it, you got to rewatch the whole darn recording, where a lot of people just want to download the PowerPoint and use it as a reference. So I'd like to put screenshots in so people can easily reference it. So this is just under security and REST API settings. You don't need to do a blueprint for this, but if you won't have one when you first go in here, so you just need to click the little green plus to create a new key, and it'll generate a key for you. That's in the client key. It's highlighted. And that is the key you give to your developers or your third party for integration. And then they'll need that, and then probably a login. There's some other stuff in here like your token lifespan. honestly, if you're using HTTPS, you can have a really long token lifespan. So I think that's out of the box set to 20 minutes. I set it to 120 and this is our mobile test site. So API access is enabled. That checkbox is checked by default. Now, and on this slide, I say best practice to create a REST API key for each integration. So in theory, you could use a client key for your SCOM integration, your SCCM integration, your Active Directory integration, your PeopleSoft integration. All these integrations, you could use the same one. But if somebody gets a hold of that key and they start using the API to run queries and have got a bunch of data and it starts to slow down your system, you can just turn off the one key then, and it doesn't affect anybody else. You probably have other integrations that you're reliant on that you just don't want to flick off if somebody's causing a problem. So it's best practice, give everybody their own key, probably by integration, not by developer. And honestly, Cherwell doesn't have really any great tools to tell who's doing what with what client key, but if you can track it down, or if you need to retire an integration, you can just retire that key and you don't have to worry about anybody else and having it or whatever. So yeah, so you can just turn that off. It does have allow anonymous access. I generally don't like that to be checked, because then really anybody with that key can access kind of anything in your system. Where if you have that unchecked, Cherwell actually uses Cherwell security on the login. So if you've got HR ticketing and only certain people can see that, if you're having people log in, like if you have SCOM logged in and they're creating tickets, if somebody on the SCOM team wants to see the HR tickets, they won't be able to, right? Because they don't have access. But if you give anonymous access, they get a lot more access. So I could see that. Like we've got some plans to do some like portal type activities, like in mobile client, where we'll have to use that because portal users don't have a Cherwell login. That's REST. You can't log in to the portal with REST API, so you have to do anonymously and then authenticate via SAML or something like that. So, but then you need to be really careful with who gets that anonymous key. All right, so that's how you create your REST API key. So everybody will have to do that. In your out-of-box system, there is not one, so you need to create one. Okay, so let's take a look at Cherwell's Swagger interface. So first, what is Swagger? It's just open source software. It's kind of a framework. It's supported by SmartBarrett. That's kind of recent, last couple of years. They own SoapUI. IBM's involved. There's a bunch of big companies involved too. Used to be known as Swagger, now it's known as OpenAPI. People still call it Swagger. It's just a framework for developing, documenting, generating code. So Cherwell uses Swagger to find its API and provides a test site that is installed with the Cherwell API web service. So you will have that Swagger on if you're hosted, you have it. If you're internal, if you install that Cherwell API web app, you will have the Swagger interface. So I have the link in here. It's just your web server name. If you're hosted, it's like Stratacom, http stratacom.cherwellondemand.com. So your company name that cherwellondemand.com, and then Cherwell API, and then Swagger UI index, and that'll take it to Swagger. So you can do code testing with it, but it's not my favorite. It's difficult to use. It's kind of a Cherwell thing, but it's not really a Swagger problem. But I'll talk a little bit about more of that later, how that works. So when you're in Swagger, this interface, the first thing that you need to do is put your API key in. So, and some people don't know how to use this because it's got this darn toggle that you need to toggle on and then log in. So the API key you put in there where it says API key goes here. Nothing goes in the client secret. Something support will maybe put something in there. I've never had them do it, and then once you find what you want to do, you click the toggle to log in. So you click that little off, you tap on it or click it, and it turns it to on, and then it prompts you to authenticate. So like this Swagger handles all the the header information by logging in, so you won't see any of that stuff. So I put my username and password in there, and then you hit authorize, and once you hit authorize, if you get authorized and don't get an error, then you'll be able to run the code on the Swagger site. Okay, so an example of a Swagger call, like save business object, is the main API call to create, update, close object records. So this is the problem with Swagger. We'll kind of go over this. You got to dig or use previous API calls to get the data to fill this out. As here are the required fields. So you need the business object ID. That's just the GUID of the business object. So that's pretty common, easy to get, and it's the same. So if you've got some sort of integration that you want to do against multiple, like dev test and prod, it'll be the same. It'll be the same in my test and your test. It's the same for every Cherwell customer for, say, incident. And then you also need the BizOb public ID or the BizOb rec ID. So that's either the GUID of the record or if it has one, the public ID. So you don't need those to create a new one, but you do need it for updates. So you need the GUID or the public ID. If you don't put it in there, you get a new record. And then for each field, you got to supply the name and the GUID and the value. So here's kind of a save business object example. So required for every action, business object ID. That everything is a business object in Cherwell. So everything will have an object and action there. And then you got to do one of those two for an update. Some of the things you don't need, like cache key or cache scope. And then fields, you can see fields is just, that's a JSON array, right? So it's just an array. So that is one field that you see right there. So dirty display name, field ID, HTML value, and name and value. That's one field. So you'd put in the display name, which is optional, but you need like name, value, and field ID. You've got to have those. HTML is something else that you've never used, but or rarely use. So that's what you have to do for every field. So for every field, you have to know that information. And this is where kind of this Swagger idea kind of gets difficult to pull off with Cherwell, because if you want to create an incident and you've got 9 required fields, you got to go dig all those up, and it's kind of a problem. So to update, so this is a JSON call to update an incident short description. So I've got up here, I've got the incident number to update, the business object ID, which is required. So this is like the minimal number of fields you kind of need to update one field in Cherwell with the JSON call. So we've got the display name, the field ID, HTML you wouldn't need, you could delete, short description, and then value. So this is the new description, and then it's got this persist down here, which you want in there is true. So you'd have to do that, and if you had 10 fields, you would need 10 of these guys. So, and you got to figure out the field ID for each one, or the name, the database name. And then what do you get back from Cherwell? In Swagger, you kind of get this API call. This is what it's sending, the save business object. You get a response body back. So you get a business object ID. So if you create a ticket, these are the two things you get back that you can use. Generally, you're going to want the public ID, which is the ticket number, but you can also store the GUID. So if you're creating records in Cherwell, this is your return. You've got to put a bunch of stuff in there, and you want to see a response go to 200. So Cherwell kicks back at 200 if you're successful. And then this has error right here. That'll say true if there's an error, and it'll probably kick out an error like in an error array. So, but this is what you want to see if it's good. So how do you get the GUIDs for the objects in the fields? Well, if you can look in the admin client, you can get each object's GUID under business object properties, advanced business object ID, and then each field is under, if you edit the field, advanced field ID. So you can do that. Or you could use other REST API calls to get those for you. If you're not going to do a PowerShell, you don't want to look them up, you have to do this. So get business object summary, business object name, and then pass it incident to get the GUID. And then business object template will get you every field with the names and GUIDs like in an array of fields. it'll return every field, so you can look it up there. So that's another way to do it. And then my favorite is to use PowerShell to create the sample code for you. So example code is here. So if you use this URL, cherwellmobile.strikecominc.com, that's a little bit older documentation. I think it's the 931 or 930 system, and that has the PowerShell scripts in there. So when you download this, or Steve Day sends it out or whatever, use that link. That's just a site hosted behind our firewall with internet access that you can get these PowerShell scripts. And the sample code is literally in the help. You just copy and paste it into a PS1 file and run it. And you have to change your server and login credentials, but it should work. Okay, so I'm going to quick demo here some PowerShell code.
Hey, Eric, can I throw a couple of questions at you?
Yeah.
One goes, speaking of PowerShell, a little bit earlier, Albert asked, currently Cherwell customers are synced with Active Directory. Can they use PowerShell script to sync the users with Active Directory as well?
Yep. Yeah, that's what I wrote, a 1,200 line PowerShell script that syncs users and teams. If you're just users, so best practice for this is set up an OU in your Active Directory called Cherwell users or something like that. If you just want the users to be created in Cherwell, set up an OU with your Cherwell users and in Active Directory, and plop all your Cherwell users in there, and then just write a PowerShell script to look in that OU, pull those users out, and create them in Cherwell. So there is literally sample code for create user in that link. So all that link is PowerShell code. So you only have to write the code to parse through your Active Directory. And then if you want to take a little further, you create an OU, you call it Cherwell groups, you create all your Cherwell teams. You create all your Cherwell teams in there, and then put everybody in the right team. And then you have PowerShell look at every team, and then pull the users out of there, create the users if they don't exist, stick them in the team. There is a little bit for comparing, if you want to compare who's in your team in Active Directory versus who's in the team in Cherwell. Cherwell does not have, like, here, let me pull up this API. So Cherwell has this team stuff. It's got get teams, get work groups, so you can do teams and work group stuff. It has, you can add users to teams here. You can save a work group member, which is, I don't know, why is it different than, why isn't it add user to work group? I don't know. They just made them different. But one thing that you will not see in here is get work group membership. So you can see the work groups, but not the membership. So in the users, you've got, you can look at all the users, you can save a user, and you can also, where's it at? Maybe it's a query. But there is a way to look at all the users groups that they're in. So you can look at all the groups a user are in. But one of the things I had a problem with Active Directory integrations, I wanted to look at Active Directory and compare it with the users in Cherwell teams, and compare the two, and then remove them from Cherwell if they were not in Active Directory. Well, there's no API call to look at the team members. So what you have to do is create a loopback external data connector to your SQL database for Cherwell, and then you have to create an object. We just call the view team members, and that points to the team info trebuchet table, and you pull that out, and then I just stick that into an array, and I do a compare against the Active Directory. But you can't do it with, you can't do that piece, like you can't do the remove from a team. You can do the remove, but you can't tell who to remove from Active Directory because they're not in AD in the team anymore. So you have to compare. So it's a little extra step. It's kind of a pain, but we just do it for every customer that we stick this in for. So it works okay. Are there more questions, Steve?
Just to follow on that, if you don't have API set up, do you have alternative on AD end user relocation?
you don't have the API set up in Cherwell,
I
maybe?
think so, yeah.
Then I'd no.
Yes.
I would say no.
Okay.
Um,
If a token is set to expire for a very long time, should the IIS or host server get rebooted, and then would the access token get invalidated?
Probably. I don't know for sure, but I think so because of the way that token is generated, it's stored in memory. So I'm almost positive that would be invalidated. But when you're writing this code, you almost have to write it to assume that the token's going to be invalidated. So when you're writing your code, you really, well, I just request a new token every time because Cherwell kind of handles that if the token's expired or not. And it'll either pass you the same token or give you a new one. So to simplify things, I usually ask for the token every time instead of trying to use the same one, because if you use the same one, then you have to do the error checking to see if it expired or not. And to me, requesting it every time probably adds a half a millisecond to your REST call. It's just so efficient, and you don't have to write any of the other code to check to see if the token's expired. And I have done like massive integrations where I request token for every major action basically, and it doesn't slow it down at all. It's so fast. It doesn't. I mean, I guess maybe if you had a million records you're putting in, and each one was a half a millisecond, you'd have 500,000 milliseconds it would add. But that's but then you're better off doing a batch anyway. So.
Okay, well, just one last one here. Then there'll be some more later. With the JSON requests, what does dirty mean?
That basically means that it's changed. That's all that means. So if you have dirty false in there, I think it won't update it. It's like checking to see if that value has changed or not.
Okay. Yeah, actually, one little last one here. Why use PowerShell for REST API versus the native REST API functionality in Cherwell?
Oh, so I'm just talking about outside of Cherwell. Like if you want to go into Cherwell, yeah, you wouldn't necessarily use it instead of Cherwell's REST API. However, I'm starting to think for certain integrations, it may work better to do it in PowerShell because it may be faster. So for a simple integration into Cherwell's fine, right? But what if you've got a bunch of logic and now you're stuck in a one-step with 30 branches? I would rather do that in PowerShell, honestly, than write 30 branches in a one-step in Cherwell, because it's going to be a lot easier to maintain moving forward. And you can schedule it. Now you have to schedule it outside of Cherwell if you do that. And you have to change the code outside of Cherwell. But for highly complex integrations, like I could have never written this Active Directory. Well, even if Active Directory had some sort of REST API where I could have hit it, Cherwell doesn't have like a native Active Directory function calls. Like you can't say, get 80 group like you can in PowerShell. But even if it had REST, the integration is so complex, I probably still would have done it outside in some external tool, just because it can do it so much faster. But you're right. If you're just pulling something into Cherwell, you're probably going to want to use their web service tool and put it into one step and pull it in. And I do have an example of that I'll run through. So, but
all right, thanks, sir.
Yes, for creating stuff in Cherwell, like if your SCOM guy comes and says, I want to create tickets in Cherwell, and I need to know what the JSON looks like. Well, you're not really going to be able to get that out of Cherwell, right? So you're going to have to write something to either go and find all the GUIDs for him and put it all together, or just write a PowerShell script that kicks it all out, kicks out the JSON for him. So that's where I use the PowerShell. So we still do almost all of our incoming into Cherwell. Like if we're pulling something into Cherwell, we'll do that in Cherwell, but it's for the external integrations where PowerShell is good. So this code actually is literally right out of the help. So I don't think, I may have modified something in here, but so I was just going to walk you through it quick in case you wanted to download this. You can come back and look. So the important stuff, so this function, this set field value, you will see where this is used. So this is a function that allows you to set the fields by name, so you don't have to know the GUID. So that's nice. So they put that in there. This is the login stuff. So this is what you'd want to change for your environment. So you've got your server name, your auth key, username and password. And then they have some variables built in here that they use. You wouldn't have to do that, but since it's in the sample code, and all this is in the sample code. And then here's where we get our token right here. And then they build the header. So this is all building the header. So you need to do that. You need a request for a header for every request, and Swagger does not show you how to do that. You won't get anything out of Swagger for that. You just log in and it builds it up for you. So this is nice. It builds the header for you. And then of course, customer is required an incident. We're creating an incident here. So all of this is just to get the, it's kind of ridiculous, but it's to get the information to populate the customer in Cherwell. So what they're doing basically is they're looking for the person's public ID where the full name is Melanie Daniels. Now, if your public ID is full name, you don't have to do all this, but it still is a good example. And then they run some search results and they get the person back and they get their record ID right here. And then they end up using that a little bit further down when we create the incident. So this section here, so we got the header section and then we have the get customer data section, right? So this is where we get the customer data. So now we're creating a business object template. And actually, if you look back at this code, if we look at the business object for what I was using for my example, save business object, which is right here, we'll see that even the description says specify a list of fields from a business object template. Well, that's another REST call. So that's here. So here we're creating our business object template to use for our save business object. And here we have this set field value, which is our top. I know it's probably going fast, but here's our function set field value that they put in here for you. And basically what that does, it allows you to populate fields by just knowing basically the database name. So I can say status, pass it a value of new, and it creates all the JSON and stuff that we saw that we needed in Swagger. So when we look at this, it creates all this JSON for you. So it's super handy, and that's why I like to use these PowerShell scripts, because you can do this for any object. So you set field value. You can add fields in here. They have to be in the database. You have impact, priority, urgency. You want the required ones. And I just put some notes in here, like this should always be incident, like service category, subcategory. So I've got some in there. And so this builds your template, which is basically that big array of fields with all the values, and then clear that out. And then right down here is our save business object. And here's our invoke right here. So we're invoking the save business object. We've got our header in here. There's the header that was built. And then we've got the body, which is the create business object request, which is here, which is all the set field values, and it gets all stuck in here and then converted to JSON. So it's nice that they had this sample code, because this would have been a bear to build if you didn't know anything about Cherwell. So they have this sample code. They have it for create user. Use this sample code. I've used the sample code to build libraries of stuff. It could just build and build and build on it, because it basically is everything you need in the sample code. They're doing searching, they're doing creating, they're linking stuff together. So we can run this. So if we run this, I'll show you what you get. So we'll run this. You can run it right out of PowerShell. That's why PowerShell is so great. There we go. So we got our business, we got a return code of our, I'm just kicking out, I don't know if you saw that, but So I'm actually kicking out just a public ID instead of the whole return code. So my create response, I'm just returning, and PowerShell, you don't have to return it, you just put it on and it'll print it out. So I'm returning the business object public ID, which is this ticket number. So this is what you would see as a response in your calling program. All of this other stuff is what was, so I'm printing out what is sent to Cherwell, and this is what it built for me. So this is why I like PowerShell, because it builds all this stuff for you. You don't have to do it. And it's super slick. You can do it in C# too, but so it built all that for me. So every field in here it filled out. It's got all the fields, which is kind of a downside, but it's got every field and incident in here. So if you need to know what a field is, you've got it here. You can give it to your programmer if they want this in Postman to come into Cherwell. You can give them this, and every field will be in here. And they could just put a value in there if they want. So it's great for testing code. It's great for writing integrations. I'm a big PowerShell fan. Okay, so back to it. Let me kick this thing back up. Okay, so we did our short walkthrough of PowerShell code. Like I said, that short walkthrough, maybe come back and look at it, download that PowerShell code and play with it if you want to understand how Cherwell's REST API works. Visual Studio users, I talked a little about it. I mean, I've written a lot of stuff in Visual Studio, but for me, PowerShell is just so much simpler. I know I can do it on any machine. I don't have to put Visual Studio on the machine. There's a big advantage. So if I'm working with a customer, and I want to run something against theirs, internally on their site, I can do it in PowerShell because their server will have PowerShell on it. You do need to do, create the libraries that it uses. So there's a Swagger code gen process. So it is right here. So if you go to this link, it'll tell you got to run this Maven and blah, blah, blah. But to generate your stubs for your C#, you'll run this process and it'll generate the libraries for you that are referenced actually in the sample code. So if you don't have these libraries, the references won't work and the sample code won't work. Another reason I like the PowerShell. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Okay, so that is coming into Cherwell, just a very high level, some of the tools you use, what the API calls look like, how to kick out JSON for another developer using PowerShell. So that's coming into Cherwell. So now going out from Cherwell to either to pull data in or to push data out, that's a different deal. So now we're going to be in Cherwell more. So we'll kind of go over how that works. So so I don't know, Steve, were there any more questions about coming into Cherwell? Did people have more questions on that side?
A couple that came in. The code, I think you just on a previous slide you showed the code, and Christian was wondering if that code is available to everyone, and if so, where?
Yeah, so I put.
I thought I saw
this. It's the Stratacom one, so it's the Cherwell Mobile Stratacom.com. It's this link right here. So the new Cherwell ones do not have the PowerShell code; they have the C# code. But this link, the Stratacom Cherwell Mobile Stratacom Inc. one, has the PowerShell code snippets in it, right in the, like literally, like if we go look at it. Usage and examples. I think I linked right to here. So like PowerShell, get an incident, create an incident, and there's the code. Just copy and paste this, and you'll be good to go. Copy and paste and fix, because the line breaks are that's what's wrong with this thing. The line breaks are messed up, right? Because like this here, this is one line, so you got to make sure in PowerShell it's one line, or you're going to get errors. There might be a couple more in here too. Yeah, like here, same thing. So you just need to go through and like make sure this is one line. But literally all the code is here. In the new system, it's only C#. not, I don't know why they pulled the PowerShell out, but like you want to upload attachments, here you upload attachments, create an incident. There's more, yeah, like search. You want to know how to search. There's searching in here, fields. So ad hoc searching with sorting, with filtering. So all that is in here. So really great examples.
Can PowerShell work with any app or just Microsoft?
PowerShell only runs on Windows, but it can work against any REST API. So, or it's the biggest thing for me, it's got built-in Active Directory function calls. So you can look at Active Directory function calls. So, and then you can just, you can hit any REST endpoint with it because it's got built-in REST calls. So, but it does only run on Windows. So if you have a Linux box, PowerShell doesn't run on Linux unless you're running .NET on Linux, which is super new, and I've never done, but supposedly it works. And PowerShell is just a .NET app, so supposedly it'll work, but I've never done it. But Cherwell runs on Windows, so if you've got it internally, you got a Windows box. If you're hosted and only have Linux, then set up a Windows box, I guess I'd say.
Okay, thanks. One more. How do you pass username and password over REST without showing in plain text?
Well, so like in this PowerShell, what they do right here, we put it in the PowerShell script, and then what they do is they build this, PowerShell builds this authorization string. And so actually what this is, it's not a, let's see if I have it in here. I don't think I have it. It's not a username and password. In fact, I can show you what it is here. You could still use it. So to really answer the question, use HTTPS. If you use HTTPS, all the packets are encrypted. HTTP, they're not. So that is the big difference. But yeah, if I just put in here, I can show you what the header looks like. This is another reason I like PowerShell. It's really easy to show stuff. And it's got all the code completion and stuff that you'd want. All right, so let's look and see what the header looks like. Oh, shoot. It's a hash table. Okay, well, it's just a string of integers and letters is what it converts it into. So that's what you'd see in HTTP. It's just that string. If you want to hide it, use HTTPS, and it'll hide it. And so.
Okay, sounds good. Like a secure REST call. That's what
yes. Yep. Yeah. Use HTTPS for secure. Yeah.
Got it. That's it for now, Eric.
Okay. Okay. Demo time. C#. Okay. So now we're going into Cherwell, and we're going to either push or pull stuff from other systems. The example I have is pulling. So I'm gonna show you how we pull data and walk through like a structure of data. So you got a lot of scenarios where you might want to pull data from third-party systems. The following example is for UltiPro and pulling employee changes. So I actually have a fake UltiPro site that I built based on their API documentation that we use for testing. So yes, if you have a vendor that will not provide a testing site for you, but you have the API documentation, you can build your own API. Like I call it our fakey fake UltiPro site because we built it to kind of their specs. And I even have like a database backend and stuff I can do. But like we can do that for customers if they want a test site from a vendor. If they have the API calls documented, we can build a site that mimics that API site, and we can even have a little interface to put data into that site, so you can put data and change data. So that's what this is. This isn't actually tied into UltiPro. It's tied into our fakey fake UltiPro site that we built based on UltiPro's documentation. And so that's what we'll be showing you. So I maybe skipped a slide. So this is, so first add a web service. Yeah, I missed my add a web service slide. So first thing you want to do is add a web service. So we'll add the web service for UltiPro. We're going to pick service type REST, security type, be none or basic, kind of depending on what they have for security. We have none in this because it's our fakey fake one. In real UltiPro, we'd have basic. It's also kind of good practice, instead of putting the URL here, if you do have a test in a production site, to use like a stored value for production or test. So you can do that. There's a couple other options in here. You know, always call the service from the web Cherwell server. Depends on what you want to do, if you want to do that or not. I like it because then you can log all the stuff on the Cherwell server. If you don't have that checked, it'll run it from the client, which is also fine, but I prefer to run it from the server normally, so it's all coming from one place. And sometimes third-party vendors will ask for an IP address that the calls are going to come from to even lock down that. So then you definitely want to run it from that Cherwell server, or you might have to route it through some sort of F5 or something to get that IP. But and then we get into the methods. So the methods, like these are the methods defined, or we have one method, and then these are the parameters in the method. So we've got like an UltiPro changes method. So we're going to look for changes. So we have our endpoint, which is right here. It says optional, but you're probably going to have an endpoint. So then you can see here it's HTTP, our UltiPro mock server. That's our fake one, and then it's got this endpoint tacked onto it. The result type is going to be JSON. Generally, you're going to have JSON as your result type for a REST integration. Very rarely, you might see XML, you might see text in a really, really crappily implemented REST API, but generally you're going to get JSON back. And then it's important that you pick JSON so that Cherwell knows what the result is. And I'll show you why in a little bit. So then these are the parameters. So it's got like an authorization, a start date, end date, and then some page stuff, and then an API key that we needed to send in. And that's just going to be in the documentation. The vendor is going to have to tell you what those things are. So now you're ready to use that web service call from a one step. So if you create a one step, you put call a web service. And then in the call a web service, so this is our call a web service panel right here in our one step. I've got some other stuff in here too, but you want to fill out your parameters. So like in the case of getting employee changes, there's a start date and an end date, because you can query. It stores all the changes in a database, and you can query the start date and an end date. So we're starting and ending. Looking for things like that day, basically, and then we've got like our customer API that they gave us that we're sending over, and then you'll store the results in a variable that you can use later. So here at the store results as, I put get employee changes. I do everything in camel case, right? Cherwell uses spaces, but I'm more old school, so I do everything like one word camel case, and it's just easier for me to see that's a variable then when I look at it, instead of all the weird spaces and stuff that Cherwell likes to use. So this is the variable we're going to store our result in, and our result from our web service is JSON. So this is going to be a JSON file. Okay, then because it's JSON, it's a collection of employees or employee changes. Basically, we're going to step through it. So we're going to have a step through collection panel. This is step through employee changes. We've got this JSON output variable that I created in there. And then we're going to create a variable name called get employee changes collection. And that's going to be each item in there. So now I'm in the step through, and I say use a pop-up to see the results. And I'll show you that when I run this one step. But I like to see everything that's coming back. So you could either do the whole JSON in here. In this case, I just show the people's information so I can see what's coming back from UltiPro, from our Fakey Fake UltiPro, to see what's in there. So I just put it into a pop-up and use modifiers here to pull the values from JSON. And that's maybe the most confusing part. I mean, this rest stuff's pretty simple in Cherwell. Probably the modifiers are the most complex part. So here's a screenshot of the modifiers. So I'm looking at, like, what is this, first name? So you right-click, use modifier, and then do string from element. So, and it knows, it even says, returns a string value from specified JSON element. So it looks for this text first name, and it returns the string from this first name. So the first name, like Joe or whatever it is, it returns that to this variable. So that's the modifier on there. So that's how you parse through JSON. If you have, we run into things where JSON it's too deep, so you have to parse out like parts of the outer JSON to get to the inner JSON. Maybe it's 5 levels deep, and you need the inner 3, so you parse off the first 2. So there's some parsing that you can do with these modifiers that you may have to do. I've only really run into it one time, and I think I was maybe getting into it the OData, but then I kind of ran out of time. So we'll see. So that's what you use the modifiers with. And then here we're updating the records in Cherwell. So this is still stepping through the one step. And don't worry, I'll show you this one step too. But so I've got like a departure date. I've got get employee changes. I have a modifier on it where I'm looking for string from element, termination date. And I put, even though that this is a date, we're still looking from a string, because remember, everything in JSON is strings basically. JSON's a text file, so everything in it's a string. So you're always going to be okay just getting string from element, because it's going to give you the actual string text, the ASCII text that's after like termination date. Yeah, let me show you that one step before I go into cool things that we can do with. Yes. So I'm just going to go into here. I've kind of get this one step set up kind of weird, but quick search builder. And this is a customer system, but there's really nothing in here. All right, so I pull that up. I'm going to run the one step against it. So this is the one step that I've got, these employee changes, and I'll kind of show you how so it's going out to our Fake UltiPro site and it's pulling back some records that we've got out there, and then I've got some pop-ups that show up. So this is, once we are in the collection, I'm stepping through it, I'm showing who the person is, and then we've got some logic that we need to put in here to check whether or not stuff is the same if they change. So here's the second person and some logic. So we had 2 people in there, and the one step basically looks like if we look at this, here is our get employee changes. This is our one step REST call. Here's where I'm storing the results, the method, and we've got credentials, we've got a start date, end date. I don't think we need these, they're optional, and then our key, our API key, which is a variable. And then we get all the information. I'm setting everything into this JSON output, which is a JSON array, and then I step through it. So we get into step through changes, and here's where I'm showing the pop-up. So I'm just stepping through the changes. I've got this JSON output. I'm just going to step through every record in there basically. Showing a pop-up, and I've got these, all these in here. All of these are just modifiers on this get employee changes collection. So string from element first name, that'll give me the first name. And then you know, we pull someone up and we update them. yeah, we got their company ID, and then we have a couple cases here. Do we fire them or not? And then we update their record. So we can go in here, and this is where we're updating like termination or departure date. So we're updating this with a modifier pulled out of the JSON. We're looking for termination date, and we populate that with termination date. So, I mean, pretty simple. Yeah, it takes a while to put all this together. Kind of the concepts are simple, but it's all in the execution, right? It's all in the building and testing and getting the data and testing the data sets and having the pop-ups so that you can test whether or not you can see right away whether or not stuff works. So this is, I could have done this in PowerShell too, could have done the same thing. Probably honestly would have been a little easier, maybe a little easier because of some of the logic we have in here. And just because these one steps for like a pure programmer like me, the one steps aren't the most efficient way to do things. It's nice because you can see everything and they're laid out, but if we would have had much more logic in here, it probably would have made more sense to pull it out. Once you get steps that are half a dozen logical branches, it's almost faster just to go build it in something external if you have the expertise, I guess. So do we have any questions on like pulling data in to Cherwell from external sources?
No, we don't, Eric.
Okay. Okay, so these are some of the examples of REST API usage. We've got full integration to Active Directory, from Active Directory to Cherwell. That's like a 1,200 line PowerShell script, but it's doing a lot. It's doing customers and customer work groups and users and teams and team membership and role membership and syncing everything you could think of. So Jira, full ticket integration, we've done lots of different scenarios for Jira. Jira is pretty common for some of the newer development styles, faster development. So, something comes in as an incident into Cherwell, they want to create a defect for it in Jira, or it comes in as an incident and a defect in Jira, and it's not really, it's an incident, so we give them a button to click to create an incident in Cherwell and sign it to the help desk or something. ServiceNow, so some companies are using multiple, or maybe they have a service provider using ServiceNow or some other tool. So ServiceNow is fairly popular, so we've done some full ticket exchanges with that, UltiPro, ADP, secure ticketing. So some of these secure ticketing systems that scan for vulnerabilities and then create secure tickets in Cherwell. We've got all the security around the secure ticketing, and they create the secure tickets and integrate that way. SCOM, SCCM, SolarWinds, Twilio. I just did a Twilio integration a couple months ago, which is just outgoing messaging. That's an on-call, basically, platform that we're sending messages to. And then we built the mobile client. So I was just going to demo that quick and just show you how fast some of the REST calls, because some people kind of have the idea that maybe REST isn't super fast. Let me get into this. I just want to show you how fast REST is. And you think of internet integration, you don't think of fast usually either, but this is over the internet. So this is hosted on Azure, this mobile client, and it's actually hitting a server behind our firewall. So it's quite a hop to get there. And if I just go like create an incident in this mobile client, one of the things, and we just kind of added this, enhanced this customer lookup. So if I look up ER, you can see that comes up fast. And if I do space K, it's doing basically every keystroke, it's doing a REST, and you can see the little icon over here. Watch it light up. Every time that lights up, it's doing a REST query against Cherwell. So you can see how fast that is. I mean, it's really, there's not much data in our little thing, but even with customers with lots of data, it's just as fast. And one of the reasons is this is a indexed field, so the database calls are fast. But another reason is that REST is fast. So if you're thinking about, oh, I want to do REST integration, but I want it real time, and I don't know if it can keep up. But we built this whole mobile client on REST, and I'll tell you, it's way faster than Cherwell's native client. I mean, orders of magnitude faster, and because we don't have there's no restraints around it. We don't have all this legacy stuff we need to support. So it's super fast. So if you want to do something like custom interface or worried about the speed of REST, I mean, when you watch this, I mean, this is pretty crazy how fast this is. And we're doing stars, so like you can see it pulled me up even there's no C in there, so we're substituting stars spaces or stars for spaces in here, and that's configurable by customer. But so even a wildcard search, is pretty fast. So and all these are, so even something like pulling up a queue, like if you pull up an incident queue of all the open incidents, I mean, just in a second, I don't know how many are in here, but I mean it's really fast. So if you're worried about speed for REST, don't be worried, because it's incredibly fast. So any other questions?
Eric, the PowerShell scripts on Active
Yes.
Directory, is that shareable? Is that something we can share, or is it just something we need to develop?
It's something we need to put in for every customer, custom, really.
Okay.
There's too many differences. You would think it would work from customer to customer, but it doesn't, because customers store things in different spots and they have different OUs, and there's all sorts of differences in there. So usually for the customers we're implementing, we are putting it in as part of the implementation project. If you want that full integration with Active Directory, we'll do it as some sort of service engagement. I mean, it's not going to be much, a couple days at most. I mean, so.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So if people want that context D, we can do it as a services engagement. We're not gonna give away that code and have customers try to modify it themselves. There's too much. It's too important, and we spent too much time writing that code to just give it away. So we'll do it as a service engagement. There's a lot. Like I said, it's 1,200 lines of PowerShell code, so it's weeks and weeks and weeks of development to get that thing right and working. So.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay.
That's it right now.
Okay. Well, would we go an hour and 15? That's not too bad, right?
Not too bad.
I wasn't sure how long this would take. So, all right. So I promise I'll work on some OData stuff. I don't know if that guy is on who requested that, but I want to get into that too. So maybe in the next 4 weeks or so, we'll do like a 30-minute OData REST API specific to make up for me missing this on here. So, because I'm curious how it works too, because like our time tracking system, Steve, that has an OData REST backend time track. Yeah. So, but I've never hit it. So but I might want to write a mobile interface to it. So I might need to know how that works. So.
Well, good. Thanks, Eric. And this recording will be emailed out to the Cherwell community and also the people that are on this call today. And appreciate everyone's time. And thanks again, Eric. And look forward to the next one.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.